The cane did not hit my skin, but the sound of it striking the floor next to my boots made me jump. My aunt, the Dowager Countess Bathsheba, stood over me with eyes like cold glass. In the fireplace, the only letters I had ever cherished were turning into black ash. She had found my secret box of notes from Ilara, the woman she called a common contagion. I was 25 years old, a lord of the realm, yet I felt like a child trapped in a cage. Bathsheba had invited the entire local gentry to our ballroom tonight, not for a party, but to witness my surrender. She announced my betrothal to a woman I had not seen in 10 years, a woman chosen for her bloodline, not her heart. The guests clapped and cheered, their smiles feeling like sharp teeth. I stood frozen as the family ring was forced onto my finger. It was a golden shackle, heavy with the weight of 300 years of obedience. I looked at the fire, watching Ilara's words disappear forever. My chest felt tight, like a rope was being pulled around my ribs. I had been raised to polish this dynasty, to be the perfect heir, but tonight, the perfect heir was suffocating in front of everyone. The party continued around me, but I was a ghost at my own funeral. Bathsheba leaned in, her breath smelling of bitter tea. She whispered that if I ever spoke Ilara's name again, she would have the girl arrested for stealing a family heirloom. I knew it was a lie, but in this town, her word was law. Later that night, while the house slept, I crept into her study. I was looking for my father's old journal, but I found something else. Tucked inside a velvet drawer was the very brooch she claimed Ilara had stolen. My own aunt had framed the woman I loved just to keep me under her thumb. The betrayal was so sharp I could hardly breathe. My family wasn't just strict, they were villains. I grabbed my cloak and the brooch, realizing I could no longer stay in a house built on lies. I climbed out of the library window, the cold night air hitting my face like a slap. I had to get to Ilara before the dawn. I had to warn her that the Blackwoods were coming for her. I ran through the dark woods, my heart thumping against my chest. For the first time in my life, I was moving without permission. I reached the cottage at the edge of the woods just as the moon was setting. My lungs burned from the run. But when I pushed the door open, my heart stopped. The small table was overturned, and the lace Ilara worked on so hard was shredded on the floor. She was gone. Panic, cold and thick, rose in my throat. I searched the garden, calling her name in a harsh whisper. Then, I saw a flicker of light from the old church ruins on the hill. I climbed the stone steps to the belfry, tripping over my own heavy cloak. There, huddled in the shadows, was Ilara. She held a small lantern, her face pale and streaked with tears. When she saw it was me, she didn't run into my arms. She stayed back, looking at me with a mix of love and terror. "Sterling, they came for me," she whispered. I showed her the brooch, proving the theft was a setup. As we sat in the dust of the ruins, she told me something that changed everything. She wasn't just a poor seamstress. She pulled a locket from her dress, showing me a painting of a woman who looked exactly like her, holding my father's hand. I stared at the locket, my hands shaking. The woman in the painting was beautiful, but she didn't wear the jewels of a countess. She wore a simple dress, much like Ilara's. "My mother was your father's true heart," Ilara said softly. My father hadn't just known her, he had loved her. This meant Ilara was the living proof of the secret my aunt had spent decades trying to bury. My father had wanted to marry a commoner, and Bathsheba had stopped him just as she was trying to stop me. The stakes weren't just about my marriage anymore. This was about a bloodline and a hidden truth that could ruin the Blackwood name forever. If the world knew that the previous Isle had a second family, the Dowager's power would crumble. We heard the sound of horses in the distance. Bathsheba's guards were searching the woods. I knew I couldn't take Ilara back to the manor, and I couldn't leave her here. I took off my signet ring and pressed it into her hand. I told her we were leaving Sussex. We were going to a place where the name Blackwood meant nothing, even if it meant I had to lose everything I owned. By the next morning, news of my disappearance had spread. Bathsheba moved faster than I expected. She didn't just call for my return. She used her power to freeze every coin in my name. I walked into the local bank in the next town, hoping to withdraw enough for a carriage to London, but the teller looked at me with pity. "Orders from the Dowager, Lord Sterling," he said. "You have no access to the estate." I walked out into the rain, penniless for the first time in my life. I looked at my soft hands, hands that had never done a day of real work. Ilara was waiting for me at a small inn, her eyes full of worry. I realized that to protect her, I couldn't be a lord anymore. I went to the docks and found a foreman hiring men to haul crates of coal. He looked at my fine clothes and laughed, but I stripped off my velvet coat and threw it in the mud. I worked until my hands bled and my back felt like it was breaking. Every time I wanted to quit, I thought of my aunt's cold smile and the fire in our hearth. I earned 5 shillings that day. It was the proudest moment of my life. We lived in a cramped room above a bakery, the smell of bread hiding the scent of our poverty. I was learning to be a man, not a title. But one afternoon, a familiar carriage pulled up. My cousin Alistair stepped out, looking perfectly polished and terribly smug. He found me hauling flour bags and sneered. "How the mighty have fallen, Sterling," he said. He claimed he wanted to help. He offered me a ship ticket to the colonies and a small fortune to start over. But there was a catch. Ilara could not come. He said it was the only way to save the family name from a trial. I looked at the ticket and then at the window where Ilara was watching. I realized Alistair didn't care about me. If I left, he would become the heir to the title and the lands. He was the one who had helped Bathsheba burn the letters. He was a vulture waiting for me to die, so he could take my place. I took the ticket and ripped it into pieces, throwing them at his boots. "Tell my aunt that the colonies aren't far enough," I said. "I'm staying right here to watch you both fail." Alistair left in a rage, promising that I would starve. But his visit gave me an idea. He had mentioned a trial, which meant there were legal documents they were afraid of. I remembered my father's old traveling trunk, the one Bathsheba had locked in the cellar years ago. I knew I had to get back into the manor to find it. That night, I used the servants' entrance, the one I used to sneak through as a boy. The house felt different now, cold and haunted. I found the trunk covered in cobwebs. Using a heavy tool, I broke the lock. Inside, under a false bottom, I found a bundle of papers tied with a blue ribbon. It wasn't just a journal. It was a legal marriage certificate from a small chapel in the north. My father had married Ilara's mother in secret before he was forced into his official marriage. My heart raced as I read the dates. This meant Ilara wasn't just a secret. She was a legitimate daughter of the house. According to the old laws of our estate, she had a claim to the land itself. I tucked the papers into my shade, feeling the weight of the truth against my skin. 8. I couldn't stay hidden forever. The village fair was being held, and I knew Bathsheba and Alistair would be there to show the people that the Blackwood family was still strong. I arrived with Ilara, both of us dressed in simple, clean clothes. When we walked into the square, the music stopped. People whispered, pointing at the fallen lord. Bathsheba sat on a raised dais, looking like an empress. There was a contest of archery, a tradition where the winner received a purse of gold and the blessing of the manor. Alistair stepped up, hitting near the center, looking around for applause. I stepped forward next. The guards tried to block me, but the crowd shouted for me to play. I took the bow, my muscles aching from the cold docks, and I didn't just hit the center. I split Alistair's arrow in 2. The crowd went wild. I didn't take the gold. I walked up to the dais and dropped the brooch, the one they said was stolen, at my aunt's feet. "The truth always comes to light, Aunt," I said loud enough for everyone to hear, "even when you try to bury it in the ash." 9. The victory at the fair felt good, but it made me a target. 2 nights later, I returned to our room over the bakery to find the door hanging off its hinges. Ilara was gone again. This time, there was no trail, just a single lace ribbon caught on the doorframe. My heart felt like it was being crushed by a giant hand. I went to the local constable, but he was on Bathsheba's payroll and laughed in my face. I spent the night roaming the streets, desperate and alone. Near the docks, I saw a group of sailors talking about a girl being taken to a carriage with a strange crest on the door, a golden hawk. That wasn't the Blackwood crest. I realized my family wasn't the only enemy. Someone else knew about Ilara, someone who wanted her for a different reason. I followed the tracks of the carriage out of the city, my feet blistering. The trail led to a massive estate hidden behind high iron gates. It was the home of Silas Vane, the wealthiest merchant in the country. He was a man who hated the old nobility, and now he had the girl who could ruin them. 10. I climbed the gates of the Vane estate, the sharp iron digging into my hands. The gardens were filled with strange, expensive plants, and the house was more modern than Blackwood Manor. I found a window and saw Ilara sitting at a long table. She wasn't tied up. She was eating dinner with a tall, thin man with white hair. That was Silas Vane. I burst through the doors, ready to fight, but Silas didn't move. He simply gestured for me to sit. "I've been waiting for you, Lord Sterling," he said with a dry smile. He told me he hadn't kidnapped Ilara to hurt her. He had rescued her from a group of men Bathsheba had sent to finish the job. He revealed that he had been a business partner of my father's. He knew the truth about the secret marriage because he had been the witness at the chapel. He had kept the secret for 20 years, waiting for the right moment to use it against the Countess. He looked at me with sharp, calculating eyes. "You want the girl, and I want the Blackwood lands for my trade routes. Perhaps we can help each other." 11. Silas Vane was a man of cold logic. He showed me a ledger that proved Bathsheba had been paying him hush money for years. Every time she spoke of family honor, she was writing a check to keep her own lies hidden. But the money had stopped. Bathsheba had run out of coins because of her own greed and Alistair's gambling debts. Silas revealed that the thievery charges against Ilara were just the beginning. Bathsheba was planning to have Ilara sent to a workhouse where people rarely came out alive. "She wants the evidence gone, Sterling," Silas said. He explained that Ilara was a threat because if she came forward, the entire Blackwood estate would be tied up in court for years. Silas didn't care about love, but he cared about power. He offered to hide Ilara and give me the funds to fight back, but he wanted a signed contract. He wanted a seat in the trade guild that only a lord could grant. I looked at Ilara. She looked tired of running. I realized that to save her, I had to stop being a fugitive and start being a strategist. I signed the paper. 12. The alliance with Silas Vane was dangerous, but it was my only choice. He provided me with a suit of fine clothes and a carriage, but he also gave me something better, a list of every person Bathsheba owed money to. It turned out that half the gentry in the county were tired of her arrogance and her unpaid debts. We spent the week planning. I wasn't going to run away with Ilara. I was going to take back the manor. Silas would provide the legal backing, and I would provide the face of the revolution. Ilara stayed in the safety of Vane's house, learning the history of her mother's family. We spoke late at night by the fire. "Are you sure you want this, Sterling?" she asked. "The title, the house, the noise." I took her hand. "I don't want the house for the name," I said. "I want it so you never have to hide in a belfry again." We shared a quiet kiss, a promise of a future where we wouldn't be looking over our shoulders. I felt like a soldier going to war, but this time I had an army of truth behind me. 13. I returned to Blackwood Manor on a Tuesday, acting like a dog with its tail between its legs. I walked through the front doors and knelt before Bathsheba in the drawing room. Alistair was there, drinking brandy and laughing. I told them I was hungry, tired, and ready to do my duty. I told them Silas Vane had captured me and I had escaped. They believed me because they thought I was weak. "Good," Bathsheba said, her voice dripping with venom. "The wedding to Lady Genevieve will happen in 3 days. Do not embarrass me again." I was locked in my room at night, but I didn't care. I spent my days preparing for the wedding, but I was actually talking to the servants. I found the old cook and the head groom, people who had served my father. I told them the truth about the secret marriage. I showed them the locket Ilara had. They had loved my father and hated the dowager. One by one, the people who actually ran the house started to shift their loyalty to me. I was a spy in my own home. 14. The manor was buzzing with wedding preparations. Huge crates of lilies and silk arrived, all bought on credit that Bathsheba didn't have. I had to watch her walk around like a queen, insulting the maids and barking orders. She treated me like a prisoner who had finally learned his place. She even made me sit through a fitting for a new wedding suit, mocking my peasant muscles from the docks. Every time she insulted me, I just nodded and smiled. The tension was like a wire being stretched to its breaking point. Alistair was getting suspicious, though. He followed me into the garden one afternoon, accusing me of being too quiet. "You're planning something, Sterling," he hissed. I just looked at him and said, "I'm just realizing how much I've missed the gardens, Alistair. They are so full of things that grow quietly." He didn't understand the reference, but it made him nervous. I knew the final pieces were falling into place. Silas Vane's lawyers were already in the city, waiting for my signal to serve the papers that would end the Blackwood reign. One night, I heard a strange scratching sound coming from the ceiling of the east wing. This part of the house was supposed to be empty. I found a hidden staircase behind a tapestry and climbed it. In a small, dusty attic room, I found a woman sitting by a window. She was thin and gray, but her eyes were sharp. It was my Aunt Margaret, my uncle's wife, who was supposed to have died in a sanitarium years ago. Bathsheba had locked her away because she knew the location of the true family will, the one my father wrote on his deathbed. Margaret told me that my father had tried to change the will to include Ilara, but Bathsheba had intercepted it. "She's a monster, Sterling," Margaret whispered. She gave me a small brass key she had hidden in her mattress. It opened a safe in the library floor that only she knew about. I realized Bathsheba hadn't just lied. She had committed a crime that could put her in prison. I promised Margaret I would get her out of there. The puzzle was finally complete. I had the witness, the will, and the girl. The night before the wedding, Bathsheba held a grand dinner for the most important families. She wanted to show off her victory. The table was covered in silver and the finest wine. As the guests raised their glasses, I stood up. I didn't wait for a toast. I told the room that the wine they were drinking had been bought with the stolen dowry of the woman I was supposed to marry. A hush fell over the room. Bathsheba's face went from pale to purple. "Sterling, sit down," she screamed. But I didn't stop. I told them about the attic, about the secret marriage, and about the frozen accounts. I showed them the brass key. The guests began to murmur, looking at each other in shock. Alistair tried to grab me, but the head groom and two other servants stepped forward to block him. They weren't taking orders from the dowager anymore. I walked out of the room, leaving the nobility in total chaos. The mask of the Blackwood family had been ripped off in front of everyone who mattered. The war was no longer silent. Bathsheba didn't give up. The next morning, she didn't call the police. She went to the village and started a rumor. She claimed Ilara was a witch who had used a potion to confuse me. In the 1890s, the old superstitions still lived in the dark corners of the countryside. A mob of angry villagers, led by Alistair, marched towards Silas Vane's estate. They carried torches and farm tools, their faces twisted by fear and lies. I heard the shouting from the manor and realized I had to get there first. I stole the fastest horse in the stable and rode like the wind. When I arrived at Vane's gates, the crowd was already trying to break them down. "Bring out the girl," they screamed. I stood between the mob and the gates, unarmed. I didn't shout back. I talked to them about my time at the coal docks. I showed them my scarred hands. I told them that the dowager had lied to them just as she had lied to me. I was one of them now, a man who worked for his bread. The torches began to lower. Just as the mob was calming down, a scream came from the direction of the manor. A fire had started in the stables, likely from a discarded torch or Alistair's own recklessness. The wind was blowing the flames toward the main house. The villagers, who had worked for the estate for generations, panicked. "The horses!" someone yelled. I didn't hesitate. I rode back to the manor, the sky turning a terrifying orange. The heat was immense. I could hear the horses screaming in their stalls. I ran into the smoke, covering my face with a wet cloth. I broke the locks on the stalls, leading the terrified animals out one by one. My skin was blistered and my hair was singed, but I didn't stop until the last horse was safe. When I finally collapsed on the grass, the villagers were there, helping me. They saw me risk my life for the animals they cared for. The lord they hated was gone. They only saw a man who cared. Bathsheba watched from the balcony, her face a mask of horror as her power literally turned to smoke. The fire was put out, but the damage was done. In the rubble of the stables, one of the grooms found a small, soot-covered metal box. Inside was the very brooch Bathsheba had used to frame Ilara for theft. It hadn't been stolen. It had been hidden in the stable office all along. I held it up for the crowd to see. It was the final proof they needed. The dowager had staged a crime to hurt an innocent girl. The mood of the village shifted instantly from suspicion to rage against the manor. Bathsheba tried to retreat inside, but the servants refused to open the doors for her. She was trapped on her own balcony, looking down at the people she had looked down on for her entire life. Alistair was nowhere to be found. He had fled as soon as the fire got out of control. I stood in the courtyard, the smoke still stinging my eyes, and I felt a strange sense of peace. The house was scarred, but the lies were finally gone. I knew that tomorrow, the law would finally arrive to settle the score. The next morning, I tracked Alistair to the cliffs overlooking the sea. He was trying to board a small boat to escape. When he saw me, he pulled a small pistol, his hand shaking. "It was supposed to be mine, Sterling," he shouted. "The title, the money, everything." I didn't rush him. I walked slowly, telling him that the title was a curse. I told him the truth that Silas Vane's lawyers had found. Alistair wasn't even a Blackwood. His mother had a secret of her own, and he had no legal right to anything. The shock made him drop the gun. He looked at the waves crashing below, realizing his entire life was a lie. I didn't push him. I reached out a hand. "You can leave, Alistair. Go and find a life that isn't built on someone else's name." He didn't take my hand, but he didn't jump either. He turned and ran along the coast, disappearing into the fog. I stood on the cliff, the sea wind blowing through my ruined clothes, feeling the heavy burden of my family finally fall away into the water. The High Solicitor arrived at the manor at noon. In the grand hall, with the soot still in the air, the ghost from the attic, Aunt Margaret, was brought down. She was dressed in her finest old gown, looking frail but determined. She sat in the center of the room and presented the true will. It was signed by my father and witnessed by Silas Vane. The document was clear. My father had acknowledged Alara as his legitimate daughter and had left her a significant portion of the estate's land. Furthermore, the will stated that if Bathsheba ever interfered with his wishes, she was to be removed from the manor immediately. The solicitor read the words aloud, his voice echoing in the silent house. Bathsheba sat in her chair, shrinking as each word was read. She wasn't the Countess anymore. She was just an old woman who had lost everything. The law, which she had used as a weapon for so long, had finally turned its blade toward her. I looked at the portrait of my father on the wall and felt like he was finally resting. The news of the scandal hit London like a lightning bolt. The gentry, who had praised Bathsheba a week ago, now treated her name like a disease. She was officially stripped of her title. She was given 24 hours to pack her personal belongings and leave Blackwood Manor. I watched from the stairs as she moved through the halls, touching the walls she no longer owned. She looked at me, her eyes still full of hate. "You think you've won, Sterling," she hissed. "You've married a seamstress and ruined a dynasty. You'll be the laughingstock of England." I looked her in the eye and smiled, a real smile this time. "I don't care what England thinks, Aunt. I care what Alara thinks. And for the first time in 300 years, this house will be full of truth instead of honor." She walked out the front doors into the rain, no carriage waiting for her, no servants to carry her bags. She was a ghost in a world that had moved on without her. The exile was complete, and the manor was finally quiet. With the manor finally empty of enemies, I sent a carriage for Alara. But when it arrived, I had a choice to make. The solicitor told me that if I wanted to keep the full title of Isle, I had to marry someone of noble birth. If I married Alara, I would lose the rank and become a common Mr. Sterling. He waited for my answer, his pen ready over the official documents. I looked at the grand ballroom, the gold leaf on the ceilings, and the vast lands outside the window. Then I thought of the cold docks, the shared bread in the bakery, and the way Alara looked at me in the ruins. I didn't even have to think about it. I took the pen and signed the papers renouncing my title. "I've spent my whole life being a lord," I said. "I'd rather spend the rest of it being a husband." The solicitor looked surprised, then he nodded with a small smile. "I suspect you'll be much better at it, sir." I walked out onto the porch to wait for her, the weight of the crown gone from my head. The carriage pulled up, and Alara stepped out. She looked at the scarred manor and then at me. I told her that I was no longer a lord and that the house was now half hers by law. But then Silas Vane stepped out from behind her, holding a final piece of parchment. "There's one more thing," he said. He had been doing more research into Alara's mother's side of the family. It turned out her mother had been the daughter of a forgotten baronet who had lost his fortune. Alara wasn't just a commoner. She had a drop of the very noble blood Bathsheba had worshipped. It was the ultimate irony. The woman my aunt had called a contagion was actually of the same class she protected. We didn't need the title to be happy, but knowing the truth made the victory even sweeter. Silas shook my hand. The land is yours, and the trade routes are mine. A fair deal. Ilara looked at the house and then at me. I don't want to be a lady, she said. I just want to be home. We were married in the small chapel where my father had married her mother 20 years before. There were no lords or countesses in the pews, just the servants from the manor, the villagers who had helped me save the horses, and Silas Vane. Ilara didn't wear diamonds. She wore a dress of simple white lace she had made herself. When I took her hand, it wasn't a shackle, it was a promise. We returned to the manor not to rule it, but to live in it. We opened the gardens to the public and turned the west wing into a school for the village children. Bathsheba was never heard from again, and Alistair was said to be working on a ship in the Far East. Every evening, we walked through the rose gardens that my father loved. I am no longer the boy who obeys. I am the man who chose. The world may have forbidden our love once, but we built a new world where love is the only law that matters. I looked at Ilara under the stars and realized that the greatest honor isn't a name, it's being loved for who you truly are.